This is Kal Kat, the Kal Katster, and over the last two appearances of Thursdays of Merch Cards, there was discussion of the dark comedies. Listed all the dark comedies, see what they are, because it appears that my version of dark comedy is not most people's version of dark comedy. So, yeah, I define it differently apparently. Yeah, I've got a lot of movies listed here, and we're just going to read them and say whether it is or whether it isn't and why. Not going into plot details or summaries, just I'm going to read a list of movies and see what happens. Yeah, just completely random from different dark comedy lists. I got 3 different lists here from 3 different places. And yeah, and there's a special category for the John Waters movies, which are considered dark comedies as well. But here we have, the first one on the, well, these are not in order, so they're just random. Like, I wrote them down, what I thought, wrote them down. Pink Flamingos, John Waters. You can kind of group some of his other movies in there too. Pink Flamingos is sort of a gross horror comedy thing, directly horrific comedy thing. Involving the infamous drag queen Divine, who is supposed to be a serial killer in Baltimore, and she's running around like killing people randomly. And there's the other people that want her title, the filthiest personal lives. So they're like, oh, we're gonna go get her title, and we're gonna steal it from her. And these other people are gross too. They allegedly run a baby ring, and they're keeping women impregnated down in the basement. It's quite gross and macabre. John Waters' experimental films in the 70s and 80s were inspired by earlier horror stuff and comedy stuff from that time period. He didn't like hippies, he's making fun of them, and he was, for his time, a version of conservative before it was that, but he was also extremely liberal in other ways. And in his time, it meant something else than it does now. And it was interesting that he even said that drag queens back then were conservative, and so. But yes, I'm not just going to name all the John Waters movies. I'm going to skip to something else here. So here we have, that's a dark comedy. It's not for everyone. It is rated NC-17, Pink Flamingos. So, be warned. Dark comedies often are R-rated because you gotta have the violence and make it as a joke, right? Then we come to Heathers, which I saw in high school years and didn't get at the time that it was a dark comedy. I thought that was just like a horror thriller where the girls or these Heather girls are in high school and they plot a sort of early pre-Mean Girls thing. They become a clique, a cult, and they decide to take out the jocks in it. A lot of Revenge of the Nerds or something. It was. I remember seeing it with my friends and John laughing and Mark Hart, that is laughing, and Tim not laughing and not getting any of it. It was kind of funny. But yes, we had different ideas of that. Here's another one on the list. Here's Parasite, which is a Korean movie that won an Academy Award a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And I actually had backlash on the channel about that one because they didn't seem that understood it. Fair. But yes, absolutely fair. It was a movie about these people living inside a rich person's walls of the rich person's house. Basically, a lot of the jokes went over most Western audiences. I got it because I used to train Taekwondo and the Korean culture and stuff like that was prevalent. I got the jokes, so it wasn't that I didn't get the jokes. I got them. They're very subtle and sometimes very twisted. So it is a good movie. It's a good best foreign film. And it's sure dark comedy. Yeah, the idea of the people living in thing. Then we come to Train Spotting. I didn't see Train Spotting 2, but Train Spotting 1 Here's one that diverges a little bit. This movie, Train Spotting, like many dark or black comedy movies, is a chore to watch. It is grim and messed up, and therefore, well, that's what a dark comedy is, right? That's you know. I should have wrote it down. Okay, so we have yeah, Train Spotting is a movie about drug addicts in, I believe, Ireland. So here we have, yeah, Train Spotting is about these druggies, and they're basically Train Spotting. They're basically doing more drugs, and one of them dies of toxoplasmosis from cat poop. And one of them has I think it's the same guy. One of them has a baby who dies, and he has a hallucination, at least on drugs. He sees him as a zombie baby, and they've ripped that off in several cartoon parodies. And that's where it comes from. It's from Train Spotting. So if you see the zombie baby crawling on the walls, that is from Train Spotting. That's what they're ripping off. So just the kids know. But in the movie, it's like, ew, gross. And next we have Dr. Strangelove, a classic 1960s paranoia movie about the bomb, about the nuclear war and stuff. I would list that as more of a comedy with some dark elements because it's about the bomb and nuclear war. But in title, you never get the idea. You never get the idea that it's serious, though. It's not. I mean, it's the classic epitome of early dark comedy, but it's not. It's funny. It's satire. So there's a little satire there. It's funny. It's a comedy movie with some dark elements. So it crosses the boundaries. Either way. Yeah. Doctor. Could ask me. I don't know. I wasn't there. Anyway. So here we have. Doctor Strangelove. Yeah, Doctor Strangelove is fun. It's a strange movie though. I don't think the next generation, we didn't get it. The references in there, just yeah. It's about an evil scientist who wants to build wants to nuke the world because he's like a neo-Nazi, but he's a silly. Yeah. Kind of. They also listed The Great Dictator, but I wouldn't list that because that was a wartime satire of something. It was only a short. It's not a very long movie, so I didn't list that one. It's out there, but it's similar to this one. No, that's not a dark comedy. That's something else. So I don't think that is. But Doctor Strangelove is, yeah, on the border of not being one. Your next movie is... Your next dark comedy is Brazil. The American version of Brazil. And it just ends. There's no end credits or anything because they cut the ending off. In the British version, the story premise of Brazil was, I've reviewed it before, is that this guy in a dystopian society is a worker, works at a company, and he's gradually going insane, hallucinating and stuff. And in the end of the movie, he's having a breakdown or whatever, and they've trapped him. But then in the American version, it ends with him escaping with the girl in the car, driving off. Love conquers all, kind of thing. But actually, that's in his mind. In the British version, it cuts to him in the psych ward, the planet, in the dystopian future, and he is actually lost in his own mind, but he's escaped in his own mind, and that's how it ends. And the credits roll. That's the British version, even though Terry Gilliam is from. Okay, Brazil. Yeah, it's a dark comedy. Brazil is a dark comedy, definitely. So then we have, yeah, Ruthless People, also a dark comedy. Yeah, sorry about the obvious. Rather obvious, blunt title, Ruthless People. Sure. There's bad guys in it that want to do bad things to people. Okay, dark comedy. Some jokes could almost be considered partly a caper kind of thing. Similar in some ways to The Sting, which is more of a comedy. It's I don't think it's necessary. Well, dark comedy in the sense that they're bad, but not dark comedy in the sense that it's just like humor and messed up people that are jerk or something. So in that sense, that it's not a dark comedy. It's just a comedy with some dark elements. It's sort of on the gray spectrum. And then we come to American Psycho. Now, American Psycho is connected to another movie later on that I hated. American Psycho is connected to Rules of Attraction indirectly, although Rules of Attraction and American Psycho 2 were technically not canonical sequels. The director did not consider them actual sequels. He had nothing to do with the other two. They were done later, and he was like, that had nothing to do with me. So the director's like, no, don't count those two. There was a sequel book, and this is one of the main ones, Mark's Cards, that I talked about, because the book version doesn't make it as blatant as the movie does. It has a young Christian Bale in it from Batman as the Psycho. In the book version, it's more than like blatantly said, okay, he's not actually a serial killer. He's just imagining he's a serial killer. But in the movie, they make it look like he actually is a serial killer who was running around and killing random people and stuff. And they don't take it. They make the satire so subtle that I didn't catch any of it. So I figure this is a horror thriller movie. It has horror elements. He's crazy. Fine. As crazy as A Beautiful Mind, but Psycho version. Sure. And the title is right there for all to see. And the idea that the corporate America is turning him nuts is similar in a way to Clockwork Orange and Brazil. Similar theme. And Clockwork Orange is another one, but we'll get to that. But yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't consider that a black comedy, even though everyone else does. And I said, no, that's a horror thriller. There's no jokes in it, so it's not comedy. There aren't any jokes in it. It's just satire and horror. So it's not. It's not a horror. It should not be on any list as a horror. It's horror. It's just horror. Yeah. And then we come to Birdman. Yes, the Birdman movie. Also got an Oscar. Yes, also dark comedy. But strangely enough, a similar movie, Ghost World, is not a dark comedy. Ghost World has a few funny lines, or Juno is not technically a dark comedy. Has some funny lines in it, but for the most part, this is a drama. Drama is similar. And I would say in the case of Birdman, it's more of a drama. And yeah, he's quirky, but it's a drama. It shouldn't be on the list. It's interesting. It has dark elements. Doesn't have enough dark elements, though. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to say Birdman, then you might as well say Black Swan is a black comedy. And it isn't really. Black Swan is a psychological thriller where the character goes crazy doing a ballet thing. Crazy ballet. That's a thriller. So thriller and dark comedy are similar. They're in the same area. So Birdman is a drama. It's a drama. But some people might say no dark comedy. Then we come to a confusing one that's on several lists. Fargo. Fargo, don't you know? And have an ancestor being from Duluth, Minnesota, and that's not far from there, or the Dakota. So, yeah, I know. Not far from there. Why is that movie listed as a dark comedy? Is it just because of the accents? Because I remember the Fargo movie is, yeah, there were a few funny lines in it, but it was a thriller. It was a straight up thriller. There weren't jokes for jokes' sake in it. The TV show, yes, but not the movie. The movie is not a dark comedy. Shouldn't be on any dark comedy list. Fargo is a drama, a thriller. It has a few comedy elements, and no, the Coen brothers did not base it on an actual true story. They were just spoofing the true story. That didn't actually happen. Nobody got chucked in a wood chipper in Fargo, okay? I mean, somebody might have, but it's close enough to reality that that kind of is macabre and funny, and screwed up. But if that's the only thing, then your movie's a thriller. That's the only thing your movie's a thriller or a horror movie. It's a thriller. It's not a dark comedy. Mark's Cards might say, no, it's a dark comedy because of the 3 or 4 jokes that are in it. And the accents. The fact that the cop is pregnant. Yeah. Coen brothers. Yeah, well, if There Will Be Blood would count. I don't think it would, because There Would Be Blood, even though it's mentioned as the Texas horror one. Yeah, that's a horror movie. It's also them. Yeah, they got the wrong town because they said it in California instead of Texas. Yeah, that's a horror movie, so that doesn't count. That's not. Yeah. So then we come to Seven Psychopaths, which had a lot of jokes in it, but it was dark and macabre. And Seven Psychopaths was sort of a spoof of the action thriller genre movie, putting, I think, Christopher Walken and a bunch of other people in these really terse situations and then basically hurting them. Mark Scards hasn't seen it, but he should, because he'd probably like it. It's funny. It's fine. It's dark comedy. Yeah, I would say that one is. They're out in the desert and bad guys come after them and stuff. And then we have Bad Santa. Yeah, dark comedy. He's a Santa Claus that's a drunk, basically. That's the joke. He does horrible things, messed up. Yeah, so Bad Santa. The producers. They're the evil producer guys. Not the remake so much, but the early version. Yeah, that they do mean things to people. That's similar to Ruthless People. In a sense, they do mean things. They don't necessarily do mean things that are macabre. In the sense, well, I guess in the sense that they rook old people out of their fortunes. Yeah, that's a little macabre. But yeah, it classifies. It meets the standard of, yeah, okay. The Player is about Hollywood, the spoof of Hollywood, similar to Hollywoodland, the story of George Reeves, in terms of its dark tone. The Player is about Hollywood politics and stuff like that. It's dark. Parts of it are dark. The elements are a messed up ending. I think that's Bruce Willis in it. and it's just it's dark comedy. Let's say that is Eating Raoul, which is more of a horror movie than a dark comedy, I would say. I mean, it has some dark comedy jokes. The director loved John Waters movies, so he references. He's got a guy in there that sounds a little bit like David Lochary. It's not. Sounds a little bit like him. But when you see the Blu-ray version of the print, he doesn't sound as much like him. They fixed the audio, less of a reverb on him. I don't know. Yeah, it's in the videotape of it. He sounds more like him. Yeah. So, but it's not. Yeah. Then we have another slew of John Waters movies. Most of his movies were like that. So we have Eating Raoul was about these guys, rich or troglodyte guys, decide to eat their housekeeper guy when he's just too clever and he wants to sleep with the wife or whatever. So they plot to eat him. It was kind of macabre. In a similar way to The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, although that, Mark Scards says, is a drama, not a dark comedy. There's only one or two funny scenes at the end. It's not technically a dark comedy. It's a drama. Yeah, so there's this weird gray area. It's like sometimes it's a dark comedy, and sometimes it isn't. It's macabre, similar ending. Cook, a boyfriend for the boss. Gross, but is it dark? It's not dark comedy because it just isn't. Then we come to Multiple Maniacs, one of John Waters' first movies, black and white. Divine playing a serial killer that has a serial carnival of perversion and is killing people, and it has an infamous scene in which she is attacked by a giant hallucinogenic lobster that jumps on top of her. A giant lobster prop that I got from somewhere, and kills her, I guess. Yeah, it's bizarre. Then then there's Female Trouble, which is also dark comedy, also John Waters, where she plays a fashion They've spoofed the fashion industry, and she becomes all psychotic and wants to kill people. Then there's Desperate Living, where Divine wasn't in that one. She was off doing something else. And it was Edith Massey and Mink Stoll, and then in a town full of mortified people in Mortville who are homeless. And the joke is that the queen is insane and she wants to infect everyone with rabies because she doesn't like the town that she's ruling over. So It's a spoof of aristocracy being insane. Dark comedy and horror. So he does yeah, absolutely. And it also spoofs trends, politics in the 70s. Yeah. So then we have Polyester, which was a little less dark comedy, more like the 80s. Divine's older. She plays a housewife. She's like a messed up housewife. You know one? Then we come to Knives Out. Which is the Knives Out Mystery Part 1. More modern movie. Fun. Mark's Cards has seen Glass Onion. It says it's good too. I haven't seen it. But I have seen Knives Out. And dark comedy. Yeah, if you got a horror guy with knives and stuff, it's dark. That's about these guys that are trying to double cross this author guy that fakes his death. Similar to The Player, kind of. And a bunch of other stuff. Yeah. And then there's Serial Mom, which is another horror comedy, dark comedy, suburbia ripoff. Again, John Waters, with an actress playing an evil mother. Now, that was the main ones, and then there was all these other ones I wrote on the sides. Let's see, we've got that's twice. Okay, here we have the War of the Roses, which I didn't like. I didn't like that movie. It got too mean-spirited. It turned from dark comedy about halfway through, like World According to Garp did, which is kind of dark comedy. It became so mean-spirited that it became a horror movie, and then it was like, okay, this isn't really technically a dark comedy, and kind of sucks. They did it better with Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which was sort of a remake, in which they were spies fighting each other, sort of a la Femme Nikita or something. They did better in that one. War of the Roses is about these. It's not the War of the Roses in England. It's a spoof of these husband and wife fighting each other. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith is the same idea, except they're spies in that one. It makes a little more sense. Yeah. So, okay. Then we have Violent Night, which came out just a few years ago in the pandemic. And that one we should have listed in the other list. That was it's dark comedy. Santa Claus comes back as a butt-kicking superhero in some rich family. It's like being seized by these bad guys, and he helps them. Sort of it's a twist on Home Alone, more or less. There's even Home Alone traps that actually work at one point. He does something horrible with pool cue and cue balls and stuff. And people are nailed to things and crushed and stuff. It's pretty messed up. It's all dark satire comedy, very violent. The joke being it's so gory and splattery that you're like, okay, it's ridiculous. Come on. But yes. Rules of Attraction. The sequel, the sort of sequel to American Psycho. The problem with that is similar to the dark comedy Last American Virgin, in that the advertising for this Rules of Attraction movie made it out to be a funny, hilarious comedy with all kinds of jokes and wonderful things and romance and stuff. And it's a horror movie. It's a straight up horror movie in the vein of American Psycho. They should have advertised it like that and said, this is sort of a sequel, spiritual sequel to American Psycho. It's got the brother in it. And he's crazy, and he sees things. It's like, no, name your movie as a horror thriller. Do not name it as a comedy if it has no jokes. Yeah, it's a horror thriller. Say that. Say this is a part of the American Psycho universe. But therein lies the director. The director saw this sequel and said, I don't want my name on it. So that's why his name didn't appear on it. Because he's all, this is not my story or my book or anything like that. And I don't want my name on it. So I took it off. So that's what happened. But they shouldn't have remarketed it as a comedy, though. They should have just said, okay, it's in the tradition of American Psycho. It's crap. Don't bother with the sequel. He's literally a bad guy in it. He's not hallucinating. He's literally crazy. That completely defeats the purpose of the book and the original by having him actually be a killer. No. And then everyone else is. No. And there's no party. Similar to 24-Hour Party People, which was not a dark comedy, in which there was no party. There was a party for all of 10 minutes in the movie. And then everyone else was on drugs. But that's different. That's neither here nor there. Yeah. Gross Point Blank, an action thriller thing. Not a dark comedy. There's no jokes in that movie. That was one of them. Super, one of the super girlfriend thing. Not super ex-girlfriend, but super. I think that was a James Gunn. Yeah, kind of. If you thought superpowers turn you nuts, I suppose. Yeah. But I wouldn't list it as best. I just say it exists. It's a thing. It exists. Go see it. The Toxic Avenger, I guess, would count. But I think that's more horror too. I think that's more horror. Matchstick Men is one of them that they listed. I've seen that too. I've seen all of these. But it's like, I wouldn't say Matchstick Men is a comedy though. I mean, there's no jokes. There's not one joke in that movie. The guy is depressed and he's in his house and stuff. So there's no goes on an adventure. There's no jokes. It's not a comedy. There's no jokes in it. It's not a dark comedy. There's no jokes. It's dark. Drama. It is a straight up drama. It's fine, but it's a straight up drama. Treat it like it is. Death at a Funeral. Drama, not a comedy. Sure, the title is ironic, but the story maybe has 3 jokes in that one. They had a lot of other ones listed, but I didn't see them, so I'm not listing the ones I didn't see. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, more comedy, thriller, kind of, but why would it be on a best list? I don't know. Being John Malkovich. The John Malkovich one. Not a comedy. So, it's quirky, like Rushmore is quirky. There's another one. Rushmore. It's quirky, like, adaptation or something. But it is not a dark comedy because it's not dark. He's just nuts. He's in his mind. He doesn't do anything crazy. He's nuts. He's weird. He sees himself in his own mind and whatever. And yeah, it's not. Yeah, there aren't jokes in it. He's just quirky. That doesn't count as a dark comedy. Mark's Cards might say, yeah, it kind of does because it's quirky. But it kind of doesn't. It's a drama. Jokes in it. A dramedy. There aren't any jokes, though. There are very few. Very few jokes. Throw Mama from the Train. When you see that movie now, it's very dated. And straggling along with the other ones in here that are kind of. Okay, so Shaun of the Dead. Yeah, dark comedy about zombies. Yeah, Rushmore. Yeah. Yeah, dark comedy. But with Rushmore, it's more of a drama with jokes. It's a dramedy, as they call it. It's not horrific until the end. It's about a high schooler who's kind of autistic, but they didn't say it in the movie, but he clearly is. In terms of this elaborate ending with the Vietnam War done as a play with his figures and stuff. That's cool, but yeah, it's not. It's quirky again. It's another quirky movie it's clever. Napoleon Dynamite was trying to rip it off, and it was quirky as well, and it was more of a comedy than Rushmore was. So, but everybody remembers the Napoleon Dynamite movie because John Heder. Then they don't remember Rushmore so much. That was Wes Anderson. Wes Anderson's got a couple of movies on here. But I'm coming to Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction is an odd duck, though. Tarantino himself said back in the day that they all thought he was being artsy when he was doing everything out of sequence, and you see the death before that, beginning and the end, and you see everything kind of mixed up. But he wasn't being quirky. They interviewed him later, and he was all like, I thought I was putting it in order. Apparently he has really bad ADD, and he thought he was making a linear movie. He wasn't being quirky and artsy. He was making a non-linear mess because he didn't know that effect can't precede cause, and you can't show the bad guys killing the guy in one scene and then cut back to what they did the day before. That makes no sense. They just did it because, he didn't realize you don't do that. Unless it's flashbacks. But if half of the movie's flashbacks going back and forth, that's not how you do it. And Rodriguez, one of his other co-directors, came out later and said, well, if you do too many of those, it makes no sense. It's all scrambled up. Here, I'll fix it. And some of their later collaborations were a little more on point. But yes, he was confused. It wasn't that he was being artsy. He was confused. But yes, the movie Pulp Fiction has a lot of iconic lines and things that have never been completely disproven. They've entered the memes and lexicons of the period from the 90s when it came out. The most notorious of which is the Royale with cheese scene, which no one. They didn't have the internet in 1994, so the gangsters couldn't actually look up the. They had an early internet, but they couldn't have looked it up. And the Royale with cheese scene is the guy is saying, well, if they only use the metric system, then they wouldn't have a quarter pounder McDonald's over there in England. It would be called a Royale with cheese instead, and that's absolutely bullshit. I had relatives that have been to England, and they said, and France and England, and they said, nope, that is not the case. Marcus Cards was even in France in '92, 2 years before the movie came out, and it was called a quarter pounder in France. So and later on, you can go to check the French menu and the English menu. Now you can go online and check it. You can go to the French Paris menu and check it out, McDonald's menu, and see like, oh, they call it a quarter pounder there. They didn't even do a 30th anniversary or for the 2024. They didn't even do a 2014 thing or a 24 thing and say like, oh, we're gonna, as a joke, we're gonna call it a Royale with cheese because Pulp Fiction. They didn't do that over there. It's still called a quarter pounder because they would know the difference, and this is what it's called in America. Okay. So, needless to say, the mobsters in the story were pulling each other's leg. They were basically like, okay, well, yeah, I'm obviously, the guy was obviously full of it. He was like, yeah, I totally know this for a fact. He's clearly, like, BSing the other guy. Yeah. Now, in Reservoir Dogs, which is a straight-up remake of The Killing from earlier, it's a remake of something. That's why it's so good. It's a remake of something else. It's a remake of a thriller from overseas, an Asian thriller. That's Reservoir Dogs. And that one, which is also a dark comedy. I would consider that one too. Yeah. It's not on the list, but it should be. These diamond thieves are trapped inside the warehouse, and the bad cops are outside, and they're going on about stuff. Much more linear movie than this one. It was one of Tarantino's earlier ones. There's a scene in that one where they discuss the song Like a Virgin, and that one they got it right. It's in the Madonna song Like a Virgin. He goes, in that song Like a Virgin, when Madonna's singing about like touched for the very first time, she's not saying like she's a virgin again. She's saying his junk. It was so big that it was like she was virgin again. That's exactly what she meant. That is exactly what she meant. The guy was this big, or something, or huge, and it was like So that the mobsters discussing that was actually accurate. also back in Pulp Fiction, in Pulp Fiction, the other thing that they keep quoting is Ezekiel and Ecclesiastes, and they get the Bible quote wrong. They mix up Ezekiel and Ecclesiastes and Psalms. Just it's not in the. Yeah, he's misquoting it basically. He should be quoting Ezekiel, and he's quoting Ecclesiastes. It's Ezekiel 25. Anyway, and sometimes it's Psalm 23 or something. But yeah, he's saying it wrong. So he's just. But yes, but yeah, we have that was fun. Here we have. Thank You for Smoking. Thank You for Smoking was a tobacco industry spoof movie. I wonder if that's considered a dark comedy, though. I mean, the source material is cancer sticks, but is it technically a dark comedy? I would say mockumentary is probably more accurate for that one. Not a dark. Election is another one that Mark's Cards mentioned. Election, the fake election thing. Yeah, that was yeah, the election, the story, and the video. Nothing to do with current anything. Yeah. Sideways, yeah, dark comedy. Sideways, more of a personal thriller drama thing. I didn't like Sideways, but it did have its moments. I thought the ending was really stupid, and they needed a comeuppance because the two main characters are jerks, and they needed what was coming to them. In a similar way to something like Harry's War or some of these other ones, which is not a dark comedy. But yeah, so they needed their comeuppance. They're not going to get their comeuppance. Anyways, yeah, so they listed The Big Lebowski because it's a mob movie, I guess, and it's dark ideas. But yeah, comedy mob lawyer movie. How is it dark though? I think that's just a straight up comedy. It's just straight up comedy with dark elements. Yeah, this is comedy. It's not a dark comedy. Yeah, Hot Fuzz comedy. Okay, yeah, it's got like goofy stuff going on in it, but it's a spoof of Lethal Weapon, basically. And I would say that's not a dark comedy because it's just a cop spoof in England. American Beauty. Dark. Would that technically be a dark comedy too, though? I don't think so. They're saying that's a dark thriller. Drama and thriller elements. And the guy's hallucinating in it and seeing stuff that isn't there. It's a thriller. It's not a dark comedy. It's a messed up, perverted guy who hallucinates that his daughter's friend is hot for him, but she isn't. That's a thriller. That's not it. It's not funny. There's no jokes. It's just there. It's just a thing that happened. Yeah. Yeah. So, A Clockwork Orange. Now, A Clockwork Orange was about the dystopian future in England where crime has been eliminated, but you have to they rehab you and stick you in a thing, and they make you watch violent crime stuff until you go crazy and then don't want to do it anymore, I guess. Somehow going crazy makes you not want to do it anymore. A classic movie, but yes, dark comedy. And a number of other things. It's hard to describe A Clockwork Orange. It's one of those movies that should be viewed by all film school geeks. Royal Tenenbaums. Okay, the Royal Tenenbaums, Wes Anderson again. Yeah. Sure. I don't think that's a dark comedy though, because it's just a comedy. They're in it. It's goofy. It's witty. I didn't care for it so much, but yeah. If anything, Bubba Hotep would count more as a comedy than that. And then we come to MASH. The MASH, the movie, not the comedy TV show. The MASH, the movie, is a rated R horror movie about the horrors of war in the Korean War, done through the guise of Vietnam, which became the MASH TV show. It's a horror movie. It's a horror movie thing with some satire. It's not a dark comedy. It's not funny. It's horror. The TV show throws everyone off. If you're going to rent the MASH movie and see where it all started, it's like, no, you won't like it. It's completely different. I've seen it again just recently. And it's like, no, this movie is not a comedy. This movie is definitely the satire, but it's meant to be dark. So, although the song is ironic because it was written by his son, just to be as ironic as possible, but it throws it off because it's not funny. It's good, but it's not funny. Film school students should watch it. Office Space, maybe Falling Down. Similar. Office Space, I would say it was more of a comedy, though. That one. Yeah, so there's some movies. There's some movies in the dark comedy category. A bunch of them. Yeah, so, phew. There's a lot of them there. Yeah. Black comedy or dark comedy is defined as a movie with macabre satirical elements that aren't necessarily jokes. You can have jokes, and it's not a drama. It's not technically a horror movie. A thriller defined as a movie with either some sort of bad guy, supernatural element or something, or a crazy thing is going on and they have to stop it. As a thriller, horror movie, same idea. Slasher movie, whatever. comedy, you have to have things. He's Ivan Reitman and those guys that pointed out years ago that I'm gonna have to say this right. Drama is extraordinary things happening to ordinary people. Drama and horror, something extraordinary happens, something bad guys attacking or something, or they have to get through something and get out. Something kind of extraordinary drama. Comedy is ordinary things happening to extraordinary people. So somebody very clever gets in there and tells jokes and stuff. And that's comedy. Stripes, Ghostbusters, Caddyshack. All these movies that are very dated. You watch them now and you're like, what are they doing? But yeah, comedy is... Steve Martin used to say comedy is not pretty. It's like you have to have... and humor changes over the years. Humor is different now than it was in the time of the SNL original primetime players. Back in the day, George Carlin, who recently passed a couple of years ago, would say, "No, everybody sucks." He didn't like anybody, but it was funny when he did. Or Richard Pryor or Chevy Chase or someone would do. Chevy Chase tended to do. And Richard Pryor tended to do self-effacing physical humor stuff, pratfalls, stuff like that. And eat a gross sandwich or something, or whatever. Belushi would do something gross, usually. But yeah, Murray did a lot of comedy stuff back in the day. That was just either or. He'd play a goofy character or something, method act something. Robin Williams would play just about anything manic, and then he later played a lot of horror. Jim Carrey did the same thing. Robin Williams passed away. Jim Carrey's still around. He tends to do everything that's goofy and stuff. They tend to list him as a in some cases as a method actor, but Jim Carrey's not really a method actor. Jim Carrey's Jim Carrey. A method actor is someone who can. He can do different things like a method actor, but I wouldn't call him a method actor, really. He's not like Robin Williams who can play anything. He literally convince you he's the other. That's the whole thing, is you have to convince them they can do something the extraordinary people can. They have to convince you that they're not them when they're playing this other role. The late Heath Ledger convinced you he was the Joker in the Joker movie. The late Philip Seymour Hoffman convinced you he was in Hunger Games, or he was in Capote, or something, and he played that character. He was that character in Capote. Meryl Streep back in the day. A bunch of those guys. They were that character. They weren't just playing on type. You could say, "Oh, Mel Gibson." Mel Gibson, though, no, not really. He's not a method actor. Mel Gibson plays Mel Gibson. He just sometimes a little bit different, but usually he plays some gruff, heroic sort of guy that does stuff. Tom Cruise, same thing. You never really see... he did do some method acting back in the day, but usually he's doing an adventure guy. Yeah, that's what he's typecast to do. He'll do an adventure guy, usually. Some of his early stuff, he played a cocktail bartender guy, a kid in Risky Business, and that kind of thing, but that was a while back. Method actors, or the legendary actors playing... Al Pacino or whatever, those guys. Method actors. If you're typecast as a Hugh Jackman actually surprisingly is a method actor in some stuff. He doesn't just play Wolverine. He played in a bunch of different characters. So yeah, Hugh Jackman. Yeah, he did a bunch of stuff. That's method acting. But yeah, the idea of, I can tie that back into dark comedy. If you're going to play in dark comedies, you kind of got to play off type a little bit and be different. There you go. Although the John Waters movies were basically all just, we're trying to be gross, so that's not really method acting. But Divine never convinced you Divine wasn't really who he was. Just being himself. I am Divine, the filthiest person alive in all of my movies. I don't think David Lochary did any method acting either, but Mink Stoll, though, yeah, she did. But yes, Liz Rennie did too. I like to know how Edith Massey from back in the day, how she convinced them that she was a madame at one point. I'd like to know what kind of skeezy place she was a madame at, because wow, we can imagine anybody would hire her. But that was method acting though. Maybe she was that good at playing off type. They didn't realize she was Edith Massey. You never believe me. Either that, it was just a really, really, really strange place that she worked at. Because it's Baltimore. I was almost going to say Johnny Knoxville, but then I thought, no, he can only play Johnny Knoxville. Steve-O, no, he can only play Steve-O. No, none of the Jackass guys, no. None of the Jackass movies are dark comedy, technically. No, they're just comedy. Although, kind of, but no, they're comedy. You go in and you laugh at what they're doing to themselves. So, that's not really dark comedy. They're just comedy. Yeah, so... What was that one with Poehler and those other guys from new SNL who were like, well, not new now, but newer SNL, who were the guy, the boyfriend dies and they have to drag him around like a Weekend at Bernie's thing, but not Weekend at Bernie's. That was a dark. What Weekend at Bernie's was not there. Okay, Weekend at Bernie's, and this other one about the boyfriend. Yeah, or something. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, something like that. Maybe it wasn't called that. I don't know. But yeah, that was just a list of dark comedy movies. They weren't in any order. They're just I thought they'd be fun to go on about. And mostly said most of them are thrillers. Yeah, it's not the same thing. American Psycho is not a dark comedy. There's no jokes. It's just a thriller. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. There's another one. I didn't list that one. Yeah, sort of a thriller. Similar to Trainspotting. Everybody goes nuts on drugs. Bad Lieutenant isn't really. It's a drama. Yeah, they're just on drugs. So there's this medium. If the main character doesn't actually tell any jokes and they aren't funny, then it's not a comedy. I mean, by that vein, you could say Raising Arizona is a dark comedy. But a kidnapper guy that does stuff. I wonder why that's not on the list. Probably should be. What's the other Coen Brothers movie? There Will Be Blood. That's the other one, yeah. That was the one where they were allegedly in Texas. They said it in California for some reason, where their town of Antioch is nowhere near Wairika and the other ones. In Texas, they're close together, but in the movie, they were in California. They're separated by like half a day's travel. If you were on a stagecoach at that point. So it was inaccurate. All they had to do was say the movie takes place in Texas. And then they would have been fine. Because then, no, okay. They are closer together in Texas. But yes, not a dark comedy. More like a thriller. Seedy thriller. Yeah. Heathers, though. Heathers. Ooh, the joke is that the bad guy jock guy is they frame him for being like gay and because he's the bad guy. He's not really, but they humiliate his corpse afterward. It's messed up. That's pretty dark. Everybody thinks he was a little strange. Yeah, dark comedy. Yeah.